There you go. So good morning again, everybody. For your information, this session is being recorded right now. I will start saying that, well, thank you very much for coming today. I know it has been a challenging semester, very tiring, but yeah, full of opportunities as well. A lot of things to learn, a lot of things that could help us grow as professors, as teachers, as human beings in these challenging times, right? So congratulations on finishing your classes. Today's reading day. It's pretty exciting, a lot of grading coming. So let's see how this semester rolls out. Again, feel free to write in the chat any questions you have. I have created a Padlet where we can where you can share your thoughts. Let me copy paste it. I did at the beginning, but of course not everybody can see it. We have Adriana, Katie, and Kim helping us very kindly with this technology part. Let me, well, I put it already in the chat, so please feel free to visit that Padlet. Let me see if I can open it so you can see how does it look like. If you're not familiar with it, I think you are. So it's historical context and subjectivity in STEM classes. So this is a brainstorm about ways to include sociocultural aspects in quote unquote formula driven classes, right? So whenever we need to teach formulas, very let's say hard sciences, how can we include this that becomes very quickly political, very quickly controversial, very quickly uncomfortable? My point during this talk would be also to show that not doing so is also taking a side, right? So of course, silence is a complicit thing for the status quo. So not doing anything means that we agree with what we have, right? I added this one as well. So this is literally a Pandora's box. We don't know what is inside that, but it is time to get uncomfortable. So I used this site before. I think Alicia already knows it by heart. We have talked about it as well. So please feel free. You can just click here in this button, the plus button around here, and then add your comment. You can add material, you can add URLs or links, you can add images as well. All right, so please feel free during the talk. If you have something to share, please write it down there. I would hope to have a lot of material also for the winter break. All right, so let me start then. I don't see any comments in the chat. So my name is Felipe Serna. I am an assistant professor from the Physics, Photonics, and Optical Engineering department in the College of Science and Mathematics at BSU. This is my second year at BSU, so my first year just finished last September, so this is my third semester teaching. Very challenging and very different, so this is not the common tenure track way, but I have been learning a lot as well. Building a new program, so the first engineering program in a state university in Massachusetts opens also the possibilities to change things that could be improved. So that is also another way that we're building our curricula, taking that into account. All right, great. So let's start with that. So the Padlet, you will see the QR code at the upper right corner of every slide. So if you miss the link, if somebody arrives late and asks something in the chat, you know how to communicate with that person. How can they access to the panel? All right. I would start saying that the physics department at Bridgewater is being part since this fall into a national network, and there are like a couple even of international physics departments. It is driven by the American Physics Society, and it's called the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Alliance, IDEA. So we have meetings, we gather different type of universities, different type of physics departments, undergrad, grad, private, R1, and we discuss together like what is the way to change the culture in physics, because physics is one of the most harsh environments, I would say, in higher education. So it's very discriminatory against women, against, well, any kind of against religious people, even against the races, different races, immigration conditions, and so on. So our idea is to bring this sociocultural context and to bring all of this movement that is coming from society and implement it truly into our physics department. This culture has been there since the very origin of the university as it is. So it is very incrusted, like it's very inside the departments of physics. So our idea is to center the discussions around people whose identities are marginalized, as I'm saying here, create brave spaces, implementing research-based transformational methods. So we will discuss a bit more what does it mean. We are not experts, of course, in social sciences. We are not experts in history. We are not experts on dealing with trauma. So it could be very challenging for us as physicists ourselves to deal with this kind of problems in our classrooms and farther beyond, like how to include that in your curriculum, right? How to explain, for instance, the historical context of a problem. That would be like my main focus today if we are not trained into history, right? So that would be very challenging. Great. One place where you could find a lot of material is called the Underrepresentation Curriculum Project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this is a very generic web page that many STEM professionals are using to discuss and to create like ideas to increase the critical thinking of students without losing track of the quote unquote scientific part. So I'm still learning about how to address this problem because I don't want to sound like they are independent. But again, as I said, formula-driven classes needs to have as an outcome of the class the formula itself, and for the students to know how to use the formulas, how to understand the nature of the problem, how to address the unknowns and the knowns, and so on. So you might be familiar with all of those terms, right? So the idea is to implement a flexible curriculum. It should be flexible because we're talking about many type of fields, chemistry, biology. For instance, biology is very interested in this idea of eugenics and so on. So of course, it's like it's very different from maths. It's very different from engineering. So, but we share like the scientific method as our method to validate ideas. So we use basically data and experiments to validate our information. So this is to help students to critically examine scientific fields and take action. So that is a very important part. How to make the students in the classroom to not only think about it, but at the end of the day, to go to their communities and to change something in their minds, to change something in their homes, to change something in their communities, and to be more critical about what's happening around the world, right? So the lesson plan is divided in basically 3 units. So, and that's why I like these kind of talks, because usually there are many people from different fields in these OTL meetings and these university-wide meetings. Social sciences are way more advanced in these discussions, of course, because, well, this is part of their research interests. But for us as a STEM field, we think that more or less these 3 units make sense and they are easier to address. So I will focus mainly today in the unit 1, and that's the one I'm being developing this year. So those might sound like baby steps, but this transformation takes a lot of time. So the first unit is basically have the students to explore the nature of science and who does STEM. So how STEM is really subjective in that terms. Who is represented in the STEM field? Whenever you said who is a scientist, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Which kind of people? How do they talk? How do they dress? Which kind of background do they have? Which kind of music do they like even? I mean, all of these biases that we have as a society, right? So that is the very first thing that I was trying to implement. The second unit will be more about students learning about topics relevant to underrepresentation. So this is more going to statistics, going to data, and discussing about what can we do to have, like, for instance, women more represented, or Black communities more represented, Hispanic, Latinx more represented, and so on. And the third one is take action. That is the hardest part, right? So if the students do not have already a consciousness about what is the problem, then it will be impossible for them to take proper action. So the first one is to encourage the critical thinking, so to explore about their biases. The second one is to take data and analyze the data and understand like what is the size of the problem. And the third one is to take action. So how can we change those numbers? All right, good. So those are very, very like quote unquote simple steps, might be, but I will give you an example at the end about how transformative this could be in a physics class. So very interesting discussion, and actually I have very how to say disagreements with my colleagues about subjectivity and objectivity in science. So the main point here is to show that effectively science, and in particular scientists, are of course in a sociocultural context. So they depend on what's happening around them. So it's not that a scientist is isolated in a room and then they have all these brilliant ideas and they don't read about other people's work. They don't need a proper location like a professor position or like something to secure their health or all of these kind of variables, right? So whenever you start thinking about that, and whenever you start thinking about which type of person is more likely to have those privileges, then you start seeing the gaps. Right? And that starts like distancing from how good you are at science or how much impact could you make in science. So you start already with a disadvantage, right? If you don't belong to this privileged subgroup, right? So it is important then to start these discussions of inequality and justice from a traditional science unit. So in a traditional science unit, you start saying, okay, for instance, you start teaching about the second Newton's law. And then you start talking about mass times acceleration. And then you do a free body diagram. And then you remember all these arrows that are nightmares for our students. And then you start breaking those vectors into components. And then you start saying static or dynamic. And then you say the units is Newtons. And then maybe you might say, okay, we call this unit Newtons, which is kilograms times meters over a second, to celebrate Newton's life and to celebrate Newton's contribution. And we don't say anything else. We don't mention that he was from a wealthy family. We don't mention that he was in Cambridge University in the UK. We don't mention that he doesn't need to worry about what he's going to eat next day. So while at that time, it was like the case of the majority of the population, all right? The point here is that you have a lot of pushback saying that, okay, so you are discrediting how genius was Newton. And that is the fine line. So because of course it was brilliant and his proposals are brilliant and the mechanics from Newton are still used nowadays from cosmology down to mechanical engineering, so everywhere. So it's brilliant. But it doesn't mean that we don't need to address that he was in a privileged position to do so, right? So, and as I mentioned here, it would be hypocritical to think about making science more socially just without addressing what happens in our own classrooms and what happens in our own laboratories in our own history. All right, great. So some generic activities to encourage students, and without going too much into politics or without going too much into risking losing your class, because that is another problem we face all the time. They feel attacked, or they feel like, oh, okay, because I'm white, then it means that I need to pass here and I'm not suffering. So yeah, you will have all of these kind of pushbacks. So one of the activities they propose in the underrepresented curriculum, so this is like not my idea, is to learn at least from one Black scientist, but it should be before 1950. They would need a couple of days, I'm sure. It's not as simple as Googling it. So be sure to use several sources in your research, right? And then ask yourself these questions. What search terms did you use? Do you use the word Black? Do you use just physicists and you found a Black physicist from the 1950s? I don't think so. So why do you need to add something else? Compare internet searches for only physicists or Black physicists. What was the path that brought each to physics? So was it because They were sometimes, most of the time before 1950, it was because the black physicist was adopted by a white family. So that is very impressive. What inspired and motivated those physicists to become physicists? Did they have access to telescopes when they were children? Did they have access to wealth in general when they were children to think about something else? There are many beautiful stories about black astronauts, and they tell about their stories. And I encourage you to look for that. Were there obstacles they say they overcame in the career path? And this is very important regarding assimilation. Would they need to behave like not being black, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And this is not very controversial, let's say. This is like just Googling something, there are facts, is there, the information is there. So you don't need to get into politics, you don't need to get too much into it. This is things that happen, right? Then summarize the research in your own words, in a few sentences, and then look up anything you don't understand, all right? Good. Yeah, I see things in the chat. Oh, thanks, Laura. Yeah, astronomers, yeah, astronomers and astronauts, yeah. I mentioned astronauts because they are really inspiring for children. So I'm really interested in astronauts, especially black astronauts, because they inspire a lot of black children to become scientists in general. So it's and they have very nice stories. All right, good. What about the data analysis? So now we're talking about the culture in science. So after doing this study, for instance, about black physicists, then let's talk about, okay, is it still the case today? All of these problems that they faced before, are we having those things today? What would proportional representation in science look like? Does it exist? Is it necessary? Do we, and you will find you will be impressed by asking these questions in your classes, and then figure out that even some students would defend consciously or unconsciously to say that, well, it is what it is. I mean, they deserve it more. So there is no underrepresentation. The representation is what everybody is, like meritocracy, right? So whoever is up there is because they deserve it. What are possible reasons for it to not exist in our field? So first of all, does it exist? And then what are possible reasons for it to not exist for the ones who say that it doesn't exist, this problem of representation? What can we determine from data that supports our hypothesis? So that is very important. So whenever they start using their biases, then at the end of this discussion, you come with the numbers, because we're teaching science, right? So you need to prove your information using the scientific method. So this is more tricky, as I said, because there are so many components, there are so many sociocultural things that it's hard to keep up with all of the variables under control. What can we not determine? So that is the point. So how can we address, for instance, the family background, the lineage? How can we address things like an undocumented physicist? How can we address all of this? Saying that, are they misrepresented? What would we need in order to get closer to answering our questions? All right. After this discussion, then, the proposition is again to come back about how would you describe a scientist? So did looking for black scientists change your view? Are you impressed finding so many black scientists? So, and the same for women, the same for et cetera, right? The same for international researchers, or African physicists, or Chinese physicists, or Indian. How do they dress? What language do they speak? And that is a critical point, because I'm not a native English speaker. And I bring that all the time to my students. And I say, well, we need to speak English because that is the dominant language in the scientific community. If you don't write in English, you are not ready. That is basically it. So we are forced to write in English to communicate with everybody. So of course we speak the language of math mainly, but to explain that math, especially in physics, you need to explain like what are the consequences, what are the limits, what are the approximations, you need to use English language, right? So what language do scientists speak? It's only English or it's something else? What do they do? Do they do something else than being in a lab around? Do they have a life? Who do they talk to? Do they talk to normal people, quote unquote? They use normal people. Like that is an expression as well, and that is very biased. Or do they talk only with other scientists? Do they talk with the machines? I don't know. All right. And then after you can show some numbers, basic numbers. So it's 12.5% of the population of the US in 2014. So this is the statistics I have at hand. I'm pretty sure they are updated, but I couldn't find the NSF ones, so I want to use exactly the same source. Self-identified as Black or African American, right? 3.9% of the population of physicists or astronomers in 2017 self-identified as Black. A white American is 2.97 times more likely to become a physicist than a Black American. All right, and those are numbers. I don't need to put any of my political views or religious views or philosophical views to say this, right? So that is the advantage of statistics, and that's the advantage of data. And I think we need to increase the use of this in our classes, the use of this kind of schemes and diagrams. All right. Then it comes a question to discuss about those numbers. Why is there a difference between the general population and the science community? Why the percentages are not the same? And we start going up in general. Even you can go even to the Senate, to the ministries. Like why is not the same percentage as the general population that we have there? And then you start having discussions. And as I said, you will be impressed of how many students would defend the fact of saying it's because it's meritocracy. So the people who are now in those positions of power are more capable than the others. And then you can start like discussing, and then it becomes quickly, very quickly political, and very quickly like personal even. Then you do this back and forth, right? So between data and sociocultural context. Another question is, what are all the reasons that someone might say underrepresentation exists? Put differently, why is there a difference between the general population and the physics, chemistry, biology, etc. community? And then there are like some surveys that we do to our students, and then check each statement that applies. And one of them is some racial difference in aptitude for science. That is one of the answers. Of course, we would like to know that upfront. Lack of effective role models for Black students. That is very important, and we discovered that that's why I mentioned also the astronauts again. Among freshmen, a smaller percentage of Black students are interested in studying science. So it's basically their fault. That's what this answer is saying. Discrimination in the physics, chemistry, or biology hiring process against Black applicants. That is connected with role models, right? A thought I wish I could share with everyone is, and then let's open for them to write. So yeah, we literally want to explore what are the biases there and how much they justify the status quo again. This is a very long discussion. So I know I am running out of time almost, or I still have 6 minutes, but I would like to give you some other material. So there is another project, which is the Step Up project. That is for high school teachers, and is mainly designed for high school physics lessons to empower teachers, create cultural change, and inspire young women to pursue physics in college. So this is especially addressing misogyny in physics. We are working with this with Alison and Jeff in our department because, as you know, BSU is training a lot of high school teachers in physics, and yeah, we are very successful at it. So we'd like to implement more of this material to our students, men and women, how to empower young women in high schools to pursue a career in physics or in science in general. All right, good. Here we have some definitions that I borrowed from the SPIE. SPIE is one of the largest communities in in optics and photonics. So especially, I write this especially for our colleagues in humanities. So I would like to know what are those definitions nowadays, because I know they evolve constantly, but in science it's pretty standard. It's pretty like Oxford Dictionary-like definition. So yeah, I would like to read more about, for instance, Diana or other friends that are in the call. Like, what do you think about this? All right. And actually, SPI created this one. I don't know if you can see my camera, but they create like a calendar for celebrating women in science and in optics and engineering. And every month there is like the face and the story of one woman in optics and photonics. So it's pretty nice. Good. All right. We have also a diversity and inclusion advocacy recognition from the OSA. I am an OSA ambassador as well. We're working very heavily to change also the culture in optics and photonics in general, companies, labs, and universities. And we give this prize every year, so to recognize any kind of activity that improve the diversity and the awareness of diversity for diversity in physics departments. So I can send you some materials that they have and why they earn that recognition this year. So I was part of the committee. All right. One initiative that I am trying to implement with our students in physics. So this one is a wiki editathon. This is specifically addressing women, and they can do that at home. So we can do some of the classes. We did that with the OSA as well in Sunday, May 10th. We're planning to do others for Black scientists, from Hispanics, for underrepresented populations in STEM fields. But those numbers are like really scandalous, I would say. So 18% of the 1.6 million biographies in the English Wikipedia are about women. Only 18%. The figure is lower for people tagged as scientists. So 16% of almost 150,000 articles. And of course, we know women are contributing enormously, and Wikipedia is more for nowadays. So we're reproducing the same systems of oppression and forgetting the names of women intentionally in Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is still not the most formal source, but it's the first source that many people visit. So I think it's very important to start there and to start creating this culture or normalizing Black excellence or women excellence or all of the discoveries that they are having in the latest years. All right. So I think we can implement that even in the college as an activity. It's for free. It's nice for the students to learn how Wikipedia works. How can you submit an article? How can you edit an article? How can you add information? How can you translate? That is also very important. So that I'm pushing also for that. Like all the articles at least to be in Spanish, French, and English, let's say, of each woman in photonics and optics in this case. But we can increase that initiative because it doesn't require, again, money, and it could be done at home. So it could be even like, for instance, a part of a class at BSU next semester or something like that. All right, it's only one idea, right? Good. Here there's some images of, let's say, my activities with the OSA for diversity. So here we have a Latin American meeting with the OSA community and also the congressional visits, because I think to create real change, we need to change the policies. Right? Apart from the awareness, apart from the discussions, we need to implement it, right, somehow. So I think there is an important connection missing between politicians and people in power and us scientists, as we noticed even with the COVID situation. So it was even hard to fight against these conspiracy theories and so on, as there was not a direct channel with the entities of power and the scientific community itself, and we were looked as an opinion, right? And well, we might agree that that science and the results of science are not just an opinion, but are based on data. That data could be improved, of course, could be wrong, but we can find the reasons why if we follow a proper procedures, right? Good. I would like to end pretty soon. One of the initiatives that we work on is this Amplified Black Voices in Science. This is a program that we are raising as OSA ambassadors for 60 scholarships of $4,000 each over 5 years for Black students in the whole world for higher studies in optics and photonics. So we are raising, we're looking for donations and funding all over the world to get this 240,000 by 31st of March 2021 goal. So concrete action, this is one of the concrete actions that I can show we're working on. Of course, it could be improved. And we want this to be like a general public policy, not only like a private initiative of donations, right? But we want to show that effectively there is a lot of advantages of having a more diverse pool of students and population represented in optics and photonics and in STEM in general. All right, and here I would like to show you one example. That is my last part. I will go very quickly through it. I will not explain you, but that was one of my classes, thermal physics, between October 5 and 9 with Navid. I think Navid is around here. I saw him in the call, I guess. So thanks for the invitation, by the way, and how to increase the immigration awareness and how immigration is important for science. Again, a scientist is not just in a corner discovering things and that's it. So I try to explain like the history of each of the inventors, even though they were mainly white males from empires, right? In this case, in the case they're European empires, so Italy, France, Spain, Sweden. They needed to travel, and that need to travel improve the scientific discoveries. So I try to explain, like for instance, Torricelli, which was the inventor of the barometer. He was not born in Italy. Italy didn't exist at that time, and even my students were impressed by that. Well, okay, I'm not a historian myself, but you need to understand the nuances of it. So he was born actually in the Papal States, and there was a very conflicted relation between science and the Papal States at that time. So Torricelli actually left to Tuscany, which was a different state, even though it was Italy, what we know as Italy today, but it was more open, right? More open to science. So he was forced to leave, and that's how I started my class saying, you see how important is immigration. A scientist would need to go to another place if his or her or their ideas is not welcome where they were born and where they were working at the beginning, right? So I continue like that, and I start explaining like the different collaborations between different countries and different states and different researchers as well. And well, I can give you the whole talk, but then I will go very quickly. I explain like kingdoms at that time. Ireland was not a country, it was not a republic, of course. They were at war with the Kingdom of England, and then scientists will go from one side to the other all the time. They will fight against each other, and they will have like different paradoxes, even scientific paradoxes, as part of the political translation of the conflict. And that was the case also in physics. For instance, the Newtonian way of seeing things and the French way of seeing things, which was the wave theory from France and the particle theory from England. And now we know that is a duality. So both of them were right. But at that time, it was a political issue, right? Good. I increase also like I try to increase the awareness of women that are never mentioned actually in physics classes. And the first women to publish in the Academy of Science of France, which was one of the most important ones at that time in Europe, was in this topic, in thermal physics. And she was competing actually with Voltaire, the same Voltaire as the philosopher Voltaire. And they had very interesting discussions. So I invited students to check the material of Madame Châtelet. And then, well, especially the women in my class were very happy to see this example. So to see themselves represented also in the history and seeing their contributions in this field help a lot for them to be more engaged with the class. All right, and I invite them to check also Maria Mitchell. I don't know if you know her. She's from Massachusetts. She actually, I need to cheat here. I need to read. But she was a professor in Vassar College at that time. And when she was there with her guidance, Vassar College enrolled more students in mathematics and astronomy than Harvard University between 1865 and 1888, because a lot of women were joining the Vassar College to follow this path. So it shows also how important it is to increase the diversity in the hiring process and also in the student process. It will come naturally after that. All right, some books for the winter break, and then I offer some titles there. I can send you an email with the names. Superior and inferior are some that I really like. I discussed about it with Alicia as well as with others in this call. But I've been buying others that I didn't have time to read. This semester has been very hectic. But for instance, People Science, Technically Wrong, some have very interesting titles like Algorithms of Oppression. So how algorithms are biased. When you look for some names, you have specific features, or where you look for something in one place geographically and you look in another, you have a different outcome. So it's a very interesting book. So I encourage you to read that. How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. So just to show also that science, quote unquote, or technology is not independent or of these social problems. All right. Last but not least, I would like to end inviting you to check our new Photonics and Optical Engineering program. We are very proud of that. We're working on that. It's a work in progress. And we want to integrate this social, cultural part into it. And that's why I mentioned in the abstract of this talk to do it in the BSU way, because we need to be very aware of which kind of population we have, which kind of students are we having, and how to have more engaging discussions, more engaged students, and especially having students taking action to change things. All right, great. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Remember to visit the paddle. I extend myself a couple of minutes more. I'm sorry about that. Thanks for the ones who stayed. I would like to stop sharing so I can see your faces. I see many comments in the chat. Thank you very much. I will save the chat and I will reply to you. There you go. I don't know if you're not free to unmute, if you would like to. Oh, yes, you can unmute. Well, thanks again. Well, I see finally everybody. And I see Kristen, Laura, yeah, Diana, Navid, nice. Good. Nathaya is here too. Yeah, with the camera off. Nathaya. Well, yeah, so I gave this class during my thermal class, and I got both very encouraging messages and saying that was the best lecture I had in the semester, and others saying that we missed one class because we didn't see the formula. So, of course, I will not name the students, but yeah. Yes, Diana.
How do you respond to students who say we missed a class? And in general, what kind of pushback do you get, and how are you handling it?
Usually, there is a lot of entitlement in this kind of assertion, let's say. So they think that there is a superiority thing about only talking about numbers and formulas. So the way I try to address that is literally pushing back in the historical context. So my question would be, imagine you are in 1680 and you have access only to a tube of glass. How would you do a measurement about the pressure of the atmosphere with that? They would have no idea about that. And then I say, so read the story of this person and you will see, and you will learn about science, and you will learn how to do it, and you would learn how is it possible to do it, right? So it is because the limitations of the equipment, of course, are part of it, and we take that as granted. So, for instance, the bars, which is one of the units we use for pressure, comes from the barometer, and then is that whole history that I mentioned before, from the Papal State going to Tuscany, and how in Tuscany there was this possibility to discuss about these ideas. So yeah, I try to push back, quote unquote, talking about the scientific part of it and challenging their thoughts in science, if you want to call it like that. So to show how necessary it is to be aware of that, to be able to understand why we are not doing it in another way. Is there another way? Maybe. So that's how I encourage also to imagine nowadays there would be an easier way with which materials or something like that. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Diana.
Thanks. It's wonderful.
Yes, Alicia.
I had kind of a connected question to that. How do you set student expectations? Like on day one of your class, are students already aware that they're going to be having these type of conversations?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I'm still trying to learn that myself. That's why I started with the first part, only the awareness. I would say even afraid of going to the action part, which is the last goal, because of the same reason. It's hard to remodel everything, and I need to be mindful of the time as well. So even though, of course, I disagree, as you might guess already with my talk, saying that this is not important, like teaching the history of it or teaching like how representation is important, I am aware of trying to discuss about that takes time from the semester, right? So playing with that has been a bit challenging, to be honest. So I usually, what I do is, and thank you actually, Navid, for the initiative, was to play with that. So I would just say like, oh, this week we're celebrating immigration. So that is perfect for our class to do this. So I didn't need to start at the beginning saying like, okay, we will talk about immigration during the class, and that will be an integral part of the class, because that might be too much for some students. But then when I mentioned, okay, this is part of an initiative university-wide, and we are aware that we are not independent of that, and the same with Black History Month or celebrating Hispanic contributions or something like that. So using those dates as a way for the students not to feel like, wow, okay, this became a humanities class, which I wouldn't disagree with, but many students would. So yeah, that is the way I do it, Alicia. So, but I'm still learning. If you have any ideas, of course.
That's really cool. I like the idea of kind of linking up with these larger university initiatives. I think sometimes STEM students don't see themselves as part of this like larger BSU community as much as other disciplines. So that's really cool. That really appeals to me.
Yes, Laura, of course.
By the way, just in case anybody thought it was surprising that you said, is it important what kind of music people listen to? When I was reacting to that, I was just remembering, and this made me think, sometimes bad things happen in my class by accident, and sometimes good things happen in my class by accident. And I'm sort of known to my friends as a pop culture void, but like even I knew when I was reading the textbook in the computer science class that there was a really, really dated reference because it was teaching about how to write a while loop. And it said, who was the greatest musician of all time? And then if you answered John Lennon, it would say, you are correct. And if you answered anything else, it would say, you are incorrect. The greatest musician of all time is John Lennon. So I was thinking, oh, thank goodness I have a teenager who can name like some other musician. So I put a different musician in there when I taught about the while loop. And then I asked, since I didn't know anything about music, like, does anybody here like Lil Tecca? After I gave the example, it was one Black student raised his hand, huge smile, everybody else kind of turned. And the exact same thing happened in the other section that I teach, someone way at the back a woman, she raised her hand, big smile, you know. And so I was thinking, like, for them, it could have been a rare moment where they were sort of like at a cultural advantage or in a more inclusive example than other people who had like little question marks over their heads. So it was kind of interesting.
Right, Laura, yes, I agree. Yeah, that's very funny too. Yeah. Yes, Kristen, please.
Hey, so I don't know if this is an effective way to think about how do you react to students who are like, oh, we just lost time, right? We just lost physics time. I mean, it's very, I think we're at a stage now where if our students are not knowledgeable about equity and racial justice, that when they go into their careers, it can actually put their careers in jeopardy. And so having these sort of really open, honest conversations with students now when they're in their really safe environment to learn will actually protect them potentially going forward. So I don't know if that isn't something to be thinking about too as a rationale to make it very career focused. I know there are lots of other reasons to be doing this work, but for somebody who's saying why as a physicist do I have to know this? It's like, well, if you don't, this could potentially put your career in jeopardy. I mean, because that is where we're moving as disciplines. I hope.
Can I
I don't
jump
want people
in
to
here?
lose their job. I don't want people to lose their jobs, but
Well, I often, not often, pretty much regularly start my classes by saying, how do we know what we know? Is it inevitable that the field of knowledge in whatever discipline we're in is here with us today? And the answer to that is no. And there are reasons for that. And so it's almost like it's a proactive way, in a sense, of starting off, positioning what is going to unfold over the course of the semester in terms of relating ideas and placing them within their socio-historical context. And I find that when I start off that way, it sets students up for starting to ask questions. The other thing I say is we're going to be, part of what we're doing here is learning to ask questions. And how we ask questions, what kinds of questions we ask, why we come up with certain ideas to ask certain questions are all shaped by many factors, and here are some of those factors. We have an environment of learning that in some ways, I love the teaching and learning perspective that puts learning in the hands of students, but at the same time, students need to have some kind of background to begin to ask the right kinds of questions, and they can't come to a discussion without some level of information. So the beginning of class, I usually say, look, I'm going to be talking a lot to you, and then we're going to open it up and you're going to be talking more and be more involved. But first you have to understand the parameters that are shaping our discussion. I'm here speaking to you today as the second generation of women in the university, really the second generation that have been regularly hired in university positions. And there's a reason for that. And so I bring a certain perspective, and so it's just a whole orientation of learning. And I think that begins students, it starts them off in a way that anticipates the possibility of resistance and limits their ability to resist, but instead starts them asking questions in the direction of this line of inquiry.
I agree, and if I may say something, it is very important. That is my experience again, and but students are usually asking, like, why do I need to know how to solve second-order differential equations for my daily life? I mean, if I don't do, so I think this connection with with the world. I mean, that is the essence of physics. The essence of physics is to explain nature and to explain what's happening every day around us. And I try to encourage that. And that is linked, of course, to the needs. So the physics that a community needs to know to survive in Boston is not the same as in Colombia, or in the coast of Colombia, or in the mountains in Colombia, or in the Arctic, or in Cuba. I mean, so you need to understand the heating processes differently, the climate processes differently, the seasons differently. So, and for that, we develop very complicated models and very sophisticated softwares and so on. And we learn about how to use those softwares, but we don't know that they have a reasons to be, and they have an application, let's say. And that's why I'm really like the project stuff. That is very time consuming for grading, to be honest. But it's very nice that the students take themselves like what is out of their interest, and they know. This semester, for instance, in thermal physics, I had projects from cooking down to theory of chaos, the most like theoretical stuff, because that's what they are passionate about. And I try to explain, yes, thermal physics is there in all of them. So, and all the equations you learn and all the concepts you learn could be applied for those, right? So, yeah, I think that connection helps also to think about, okay, we're humans, and then we develop this for something, right? Yes, Laura.
I was thinking when you mentioned the heat, I was talking with my high school friend who lives in Texas earlier in the year, and she was saying, I think the coronavirus situation down here is about to get better, because I was waiting to hear what she was going to say, because here we were all saying it's about to get worse because everybody's going to be inside. And she said, because it's finally starting to cool off, and I think people are going to get outside more. And I was just amazed, because I never thought of that perspective from where she lived. And I think the next day I saw in the Washington Post, like how it was going to get worse because it was getting colder and people were going to be inside more. Like I wouldn't have given that a second thought, except for that conversation I had. So there was that scientific interplay with the climate and who was doing the talking.
Right. Yeah, we can keep talking like so much about it. Yes, I had my best friend lives in Argentina, and now it's summer for them, and they're with the Christmas tree and with the fake snow, and it's super hot down there. So it's like this, let's say, this narrative that becomes global, even independently of the situation. So it is like even if I may be aggressive about it, like a colonial way of thinking, right? So it's like they adapted to that, and then we do the same in Colombia. I mean, we don't have seasons even, but we have this fake snow thing and so on. So it's like, because that is our image of Christmas too, with Santa Claus and all of that, and we don't have even this fauna that Santa Claus has and all of that. So it is interesting that all the children are familiar with that as well. Yeah, in Florida too. Yes, correct. Well, I'm mindful of the time. I think I'm gonna receive an email saying that I extend my time. Thank you very much for your attention today. Again, congratulations for ending your classes. This is reading day, very challenging, and very glad to see you all. And then let's continue the conversation, as I always say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel.